Ooh, starting off with a good burp. Welcome to Profiteers versus the People, the show where we punch up and dispel myths surrounding modern great people.
For the uninitiated, we take the very rich, particularly those with a media presence like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or the Mowbrays, and we put them through our PR torture test and see if they come out on crutches, our PR torture test acronym.
C stands for consumer harm. R for rich parents, U for union suppression and employee abuse, T for tax avoidance or tax dependency, the second C for child labor allegations, the H for harassment allegations, E for egregious behavior after hours, and the S for slap suits and journalist suppression. I'm Money Mike.
And I'm Rad Bill.
And...
So, for this one, the crutches acronym is brilliant. We love it. It's like a super fun thing. For this one, we're not going to be doing it, though, because for this series, we're analyzing an entire company. And this company is lousy with all of those things, save for rich parents, because it's not like a person, despite what the Supreme Court says. But this one, we're going to be looking at Nestle's second big boom product, and the one I associate them with most closely, chocolate and cocoa and shit. Though Henry Nestle's condensed milk product, or baby food, was used as a key ingredient in the invention of milk chocolate, it isn't until 1904 that the company bearing his name stakes a claim in that line of business. And today, the company lines shelves in your local grocery store. Here are just a few names that might jump out at you. Kit Kat, Crunch, Smarties, which didn't jump out at me. I guess those are big somewhere else. It's a chocolate candy, not the Smarties that come in a little sleeve thing. Oh,
you mean not the ones I smoked in second grade?
Or the ones that I snorted in fourth. That's right. Butterfingers, and then 100 grand bars, which it's going to hurt not eating those anymore.
Delicious.
They're delicious. So good, so
they're
underrated.
The best. You just said it. Yeah, they're the best chocolate bar that is on no one's top 10. Like, they are the underground wrapper of chocolate bars.
Totally.
But we hate them because Nestle makes them.
It's like they came out as being like alt-right. And they're like, God damn it. I have to stop listening to music now? Fuck. My dad used to get those for me when I was a kid. And it was like, is this some lesson about money? And then I'd eat it and be like, oh my fucking God, this is so good.
How is it crunchy and creamy? But we gotta stop glazing 100 grand bars.
Yeah, we have to stop. You're not gonna like them by the end of this episode, but I gotta tell you, as an industry, chocolate manufacturing is pretty gosh darn by the books, which is refreshing. We don't come across that a lot in this line of extracurricular research, whatever you want to call it.
We can't call it work because no one is paying us.
We aren't making any money. It seems that we as a species can truly sit back and break each other off a piece of that Kit Kat bar with a clear conscience.
And here, for no reason at all, we're going to cover an acronym that is going to be referenced periodically in this piece, and that is WFCL.
Yes, WFCL stands for Worst Forms of Child Labor.
Yeah, we're lying about chocolate being a conscious cleanser. Every nice thing in our life is a fucking nightmare. Also, if there's an acronym for worst forms of child labor, what are the best forms of child labor? That's what I want to know.
Is there a WFCL where it's like mild forms of child labor, where it's like the kid's working hard, but whatever. I think my biggest gripe with that one is
twice a day. I mean, come on.
he's making shoes for 20 hours a day. But the worst thing I can say about that room is it's just really hot, and there are hundreds of people in there without a safe fire exit. Whatever.
And Nike's on the door for no reason. But anyway,
we're gonna get to that later. I cherish this. That in more than one of the research papers we read for this, I lost my mind researching this shit, y'all. But in more than one research paper in our sources, they refer to child labor, like a child labor scandal, as a Nike problem, which I love that they nailed Nike with that. At this point, everyone in the U.S. is familiar with child labor. It's the stuff that's getting legalized across the nation, where children can work in dangerous meatpacking plants for less pay instead of going to school. I guess that would be your MFCL.
Yeah, the best forms of child labor.
Yes, right? The not spicy ones. WFCL is the stuff that transcends mere horrid work conditions and focuses on the instances where children are relied upon as pieces of machinery for those who can't afford or simply don't want to spend the money buying equipment to reach certain ends. WFCL includes all forms of slavery or practice similar to slavery, such as the sale and trafficking of children, debt bondage and serfdom, and forced or compulsory labor, including forced or compulsory recruitment of, and I'm sorry, children for use in armed conflict, the use, procuring, or offering of a child for prostitution, for the production of pornography, or for pornographic performances. The use, procuring, or offering of a child for illicit activities, in particular for the production and trafficking of drugs as defined in the relevant international treaties, and work which, by its nature or the circumstances in which it's carried out, is likely to harm the health, safety, or morals of children.
Yeah, you said worst forms of child labor, and I was like, what is that? And then you read that, and I was like, oh, probably those. Probably
all of those things. The things that
those actually are worse. Yeah,
the things that our minds don't even like to
comprehend,
affiliate with children. Yeah,
yeah. I was like all forms of child labor are bad. We shouldn't be creating a totem pole of which ones are worse than others. And then you read that, and I was like, yeah, no, some are definitely worse than others.
Some are worse than others. More kids die in some of these than in other of these. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll say it again, I lost my fucking mind researching this shit. So, it's been a while since we've gone down a real rabbit hole for an episode, but we had an extra week, and we were feeling inspired by the folks over at Weird Little Guys to just let our hair down and go ape shit on the research. The back half is going to be full of gotcha moments and big fat cathartic ahas. But this is written this way because we needed a finished product, and some of the depravity in the source material is just too grisly to weave into a fact-checking narrative that's fun to listen to. Aha! You said there was no slavery in your supply chain, but in Côte d'Ivoire, one of your farmers tortured an unpaid laborer to death.
Keep this in the back of your mind as you listen. We get to maintain some levity because that's what we do. And we're calling one party an asshole. That's, again, what we do. Yeah. We're not actively mourning the people who died in their wake, of which there are a lot. So this, we will try to make fun, and it will be a task. But this is a real story with a real harrowing cost. And, sometimes... what's the phrase? 5 deaths is a tragedy, 1,000 is a statistic. And this kind of gets there, right? Like the numbers and the circumstances become so unrelatable that it's really easy to lose our human empathy in the churn, I suppose.
Yeah. There's a trade-off. When we focus on the tragedy of the situation, the perpetrators, in our mind, I would speculate, they begin to feel more like a force of nature. When we move away from focusing exclusively on the human cost, we can begin to hone in on what a group of fucking assholes a specific perpetrating group is, which is the goal.
Right. Hey, gang. Future Money Mike here. I just wanted to pop in and point out that Rad Bill and I referred to enslaved people in this episode as slaves, which is no longer a preferred term due to the fact that it implies that a state of a person's situation over which they have no control defines who they are. Neither Rad nor I believe this, nor do we believe that the fault of enslavement falls on those victimized by the practice. So we apologize for the use of the term, but we just wanted to clear that up before we continue. Back to the episode.
To set the stage a little here, and to lend Nestle some, I won't call it credit. This is not the story of Nestle creating these conditions on its own to maximize profits, and then getting caught with a supply chain loaded with child slaves. This is the story of them taking advantage of a supply chain already loaded with child slavery and hiding it to carry on reaping the rewards while accounting for changing social tastes. Then profiting from such a thing and getting called out again for trying to dilute or hide the fact that they are still profiting from this sort of thing today.
Which is just as bad. So
I think it's kind of worse.
Yeah, it's almost more cowardly. So let's start from the beginning, because we need to, and then we'll carry forward to where we think all the modern big chocolate cores bear responsibility, and then we'll hone in on Nestle's actions over the last 30 years. Specifically, the majority of which were carried out under the watchful eye of Nestle's CEO and then chairman until 2017, Peter Brabeck-Letmathe.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah.
You see, folks, regardless of what you've read in whatever health or fitness magazine, chocolate isn't even good for you.
Not at all. Like, cocoa has some benefits, but it's an ingredient in chocolate, not the end product. Water is good for you. Doesn't mean homemade Kool-Aid is good for you because it's full of water. Grape skins are good for you. Wine, not so much. You get the idea. From an ingredient list perspective, chocolate is kind of like butter with more sugar. High in all the wrong kinds of fat and calorie dense as hell.
Yeah, and the supply chain of chocolate has never been remotely moral. This goes back to the invention of chocolate. We can't even pretend it is. Willy Wonka had slaves, and he basically goes, "You guys like being slaves, right?" In front of a crowd, and they all go, "Yeah, of course. We don't need to, profit from all this chocolate being sold." You see, the way we initially got the cocoa needed for chocolate and for chocolate milk mix is the same way we got a great deal of our foodstuffs. Hundreds of years ago, Europeans went somewhere else and took it from indigenous people. Initially brought to Europe by Spaniards coming from the Americas and ingested primarily as a medicine by the sick and as an aphrodisiac by women, chocolate was expensive because of shipping costs and thus only readily available to the very rich. In 1819, Francois Louis Callier opened up a chocolate factory in Switzerland that stands to this day and looks like it could be magical. And then 5 years later, Brazil got its independence from Portugal, who sucked all the magic out of the conversation by introducing the production of cacao, which is the raw product that eventually will become cocoa, to West Africa and cultivating it by recreating the slave plantation system that had made them so rich in the Americas.
I'm going to interject here again. There's this thing that we do when recounting history where we sort of manufacture peace because it makes us comfortable.
Yep.
In a handful of our sources, Brazil, it is explained, got their independence. Independence is not a commodity, and the story never ends with it being freely given. If it appears freely given, it isn't the end of the story. Usually, freedom is wrought from the hands of oppressors with violence or other means of inconvenience to a ruling class. And usually, people have to die to make that happen. It's really interesting that the U.S. loves saying freedom isn't free in regards to our own independence from Britain, and then goes out on imperialist frenzies every couple hundred years. But that's a different subject for a different episode.
A dense and very hard to research episode. Yep. So 40 years after Portugal was encouraged to farm somewhere else, that's 1869, the Portuguese were pressured by the press into outlawing actual slavery in their African colonies and instead forced their network of plantations to hire, quote-unquote, workers, quote-unquote. In 1908, a report by Joseph Burt, who worked for the company that made Cadbury eggs, asserted that this new ethical system created by Portugal was still basically slavery because, of course, it was. Cadbury eggs, people. That Cadbury, to their credit, then boycotted Portuguese plantations on the Ivory Coast and began sourcing their chocolate from Ghana along the Gold Coast. Now, although Portugal's hand was forced once again and conditions improved modestly, Conditions didn't become enticing on the Ivory Coast until the 1950s, when commodity prices began to swell, which was a result of the collapse in price for cacao, again, the raw material in cocoa, in the 30s. As a result of this pricing collapse, new trees that would mature over the course of years and years weren't planted, and the supply of cacao diminished, causing renewed demand and interest in planting cacao trees in the 50s.
A cacao farmer is able to steer into a tide at the speed a large rock is able to steer into the tide, which means that in the entire chocolate supply chain, these farmers have the least control.
Yep.
Their yield can't change when demand changes. And most have never had a reliable means of long-term storage, and thus they sustain a huge brunt of any price fluctuation.
The middlemen buying cacao from these farms are shielded because they're able to shop around. Oh, you overproduced this year? Well, I don't have to buy from you just because you want to charge this specific price. I can go to one of these other farms and pay a better price. Most of these farms are small and disconnected from others, so in these negotiations, the farmers are blind and basically powerless.
There are virtually no collectives, and even where there are farmer collectives, there isn't enough influence to demand a specific price be honored. The power is in the hands of the middlemen, not the ones actually doing the work to produce the cacao.
The big corporates are able to protect themselves further up the supply chain from price fluctuation by buying cacao futures contracts. They also have the means to store cacao if they so choose, a luxury out of reach of almost all cacao farmers in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, as mentioned. So if demand shrinks, they have a much easier time saving the unused cacao for when it's needed. When demand is high, they can rely on the stored cacao, or they can lean on one of their futures contracts for leverage, worst comes to worst, against these local farmers. And in Cote d'Ivoire, there is no protective infrastructure for the farmer at all. It is basically the local farmer versus Nestle, versus Mars, versus Hershey, whoever, which is, I would speculate, a core reason production takes off in Cote d'Ivoire in the late 70s in that region in particular.
Futures contracts are essentially an agreement to buy something in the future at a price agreed upon today. While these contracts can trade like stock options, middlemen buy them to hedge against the possibility of adverse future price changes. There are large corporate farming conglomerates that can also buy and sell futures, but for the average cacao farmer, these tools are largely out of reach.
Yeah, they're alone in the woods. A lot of them are. I mean, these are disconnected, remote farms. Alas, when a market-changing event occurs, say a scandal comes to light about chocolate, everyone feels it a little, but these poor farmers feel it most of all.
Oh, everyone is boycotting chocolate this year because of the whole child slavery thing? Well, I guess prices are going to take a dive, and because I'm still on track for a record-breaking harvest, there's no going back now.
Yeah. Oh, everyone wants chocolate this year, so cacao's going to go for a fortune. Too bad I can't capitalize on this because I didn't plant new trees 5 years ago.
And old cacao trees don't produce as much as new ones, which means enormous weight rests on the decision of when to plant new trees.
Yeah, it's like the crops become less and less valuable over time. Like, to really make money on a cacao farm, that's almost definitely how you pronounce that. You have to be kind of planting trees all the goddamn time. Now, in the 50s, the economy was especially strong and demand was high. Cue the same cycle all over again, but more, because the governments of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, hoping to seize on a profitable trend for their people, misread the situation and encouraged aggressive deforestation and expansion of cacao farms. Ghana hoped this groundswell was the one they needed to become a chocolate superpower. Now, these farmers were still poor, but even so, this farming work was the best gig in the region. And when possible, laborers migrated from Mali and Burkina Faso to get in on the action.
Buying into a cacao farm was considered a move for securing your future. It was the thing to do.
It's a 401k or a Roth IRA. I mean, it's if you're in this region and you have the means to get your hands on a cacao farm in the 50s, you're the one that everyone's jealous of. Yep. Most farms theoretically rely on the labor of family members. Think family farms. They're growing a whole bunch of food, a lot of which they themselves eat, and thus there being less money from the biennial cacao yield isn't so bad. They've still got food on the table. The extra money is keeping the lights on, etc. Where there isn't family on which a farmer can depend, well, hire some labor from Burkina Faso, either on a sharecropper arrangement or with modest wages or with both. To protect farmers from price fluctuation and help support this developing ecosystem, the government in Ghana established a minimum price for cacao.
Basically, the government buys the produce from individual farmers and then negotiates with exporters to secure bulk pricing. The power comes from one unified place.
And there are a lot of problems that can arise from such a decision, but two were responsible for upsetting the apple cart here. One predictable, the other inevitable.
The first problem was the problem we see when a government assigns a uniform minimum wage. Bad actors toe the line, and suddenly it's a maximum wage. And the second is that the market was doomed to change. And when it finally did in the mid-60s, the government of Ghana had to slash its budget and had to reduce that minimum purchase price to goose demand to keep the tax dollars flowing.
Yep.
Thus, as always, farmers suffered.
Yep. And in the 70s, farmers cut down on the planting of cacao trees in response to this reduction in demand, which again makes sense. An international cocoa price stabilization plan was put into place but quickly failed, and in 1977, production in Côte d'Ivoire exploded, overtaking all other competitors to become the largest cacao-producing nation in the world. So to review, here's how the system that feeds us chocolate came to work. A big chocolate company wants to put chocolate on the shelves in grocery stores all over the world, so they pay an exporter based in Africa to send them cacao, which is, for the most part, processed in the country where it is fed to a human into chocolate or cocoa. This exporter is going to agree with the big chocolate provider to a specific price and then go out looking for the cacao. If they want to buy the cacao from Ghana, they have to buy it from the government, which has negotiated a minimum price, which winds up being, again, as Money Mike said, the maximum amount the exporter is going to pay from that amount. They have been paid by Nestle, let's say, nice, steady, predictable profit.
Or
this exporter could go to Côte d'Ivoire, where they can haggle with an isolated individual farmer. Those minimum prices might be in place, but that amount is guaranteed from Ghana, so if you insist on that price, I'll just go there. Plus, Mr. Farmer, who else are you going to sell this stuff to? Maybe you'll find another buyer, but you don't have anywhere to store this stuff, so clock's ticking. The farmer takes some amount beneath what Ghana is accepting, and then the cacao is off to wherever it goes to travel through a person and then through the sewer system in that person's locale. Meanwhile, the farmer separates whatever amount their family must have to survive and uses a portion of the remaining amount to buy pesticides and fertilizers to maximize the recoverable yield.
Now, these pesticides and fertilizers are subsidized, so this is a smaller hit to the farmer owner's bottom line than it could be.
Yep. And the rest go to either the laborers the farm owner has hired to help them tend the land, if they've hired any, or the person who farms the land. This is the sharecropper situation, who keeps a sliver of this amount for their family and then uses the rest to pay laborers. For both the farm owner and the potential farm renter, or the sharecropper, where things had been good in the 50s, they'd soured over the following decades. But these laborers, the ones hired by the farmer or by the sharecropper, are in an especially tedious spot. The farmer's in a weird spot, not a good one, but these laborers are really on the fringe here.
This is the group hailing from Burkina Faso or Mali and is hoping to send some money home. And this whole move by companies is something called regulatory arbitrage.
Yes.
Essentially, if one government is more favorable to do business with, in this case, Côte d'Ivoire versus Ghana, then that's what the corporations will do. And sometimes governments will get in on the action, either with straightforward bribes and kickbacks, but often because they recognize an opportunity to boost their competitive edge in some sort of export strategy. I'm not saying that they're right, but when US politicians avoid raising taxes for corporations, this is kind of what they're afraid of. If we make it more expensive to do business with us, they'll find someone else to do business with. However, it's interesting that the same politicians that have been touting the benefits of tariffs as of late, because the US is such a large economy that corporations will have to pay instead of moving their business elsewhere, are also the same ones that are afraid of them leaving. Anyway, back to cacao.
In the 80s, the price of cacao responded to the explosion of production of cacao in Côte d'Ivoire by plummeting. And in the 90s, the problem was compounded by the efforts of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and World Bank to liberalize these markets, meaning they wanted to give more access to the quote-unquote free market. From 1980 to the 1990s, the market price of cacao fell 71%, due in part to all that liberalization. Adding to the pain was that market liberalization also meant saying goodbye to all the pesticide subsidies, meaning they were suddenly out of reach for most farmers in the recommended quantity. Where 4 sprays annually were recommended, many farmers were now trying to get by with just doing 2 sprays a year, and plenty were just doing none at all. Thus, as the price crashed, the yield was lightened by disease, and by lightened, I mean by 1999, farmers were losing 30% of their yield of cacao to crop diseases.
And as sort of an aside, this liberalization also gave big internationals the opportunity to get much more involved in the procurement and exporting process. In Cameroon, for example, where over 600 exporters were operating before market liberalization, afterwards there were just 25. With the big 3, no surprise here, being Cargill, ADM, and Calabout handling a vast majority of this activity.
Yeah, and in 2000, it's revealed that there are enslaved children working on the farms.
Chapter 2, a masterclass in downplaying a PR crisis.
And the final category is corporations and scandals.
I'll take corporations and scandals for 100, Rad.
Okay, what does a corporation do when experts or scientists find atrocities in their business model?
What is invent new science and facts, Rad?
That is correct. Like the tobacco giants before them, the Biscuit, Cake, Chocolate, and Confectionery Alliance, the BCCCA, what a burdensome acronym, a trade group, commissioned a pretty flimsy study seemingly to get all the facts regarding the conditions in Côte d'Ivoire, and didn't allot the resources necessary for an actual visit to these farms. Even so, the folks conducting the study came back and were like, yeah, there's slavery happening. Like, for sure. So, what do they do now?
Well, why don't they just do the farming somewhere else?
And see, this is a good question. This was a question that I asked. Why doesn't Nestle or Mars or Hershey grow its own damn cocoa in the States, or at the very least, grow it somewhere where they will know if child slavery happens? Let's zoom back in on Nestle in particular, because I think there's impact here in looking at just one bad actor, and also because this series needs to have some sort of through point. And further, because Nestle's revenue is greater than the GDP of these two countries. See, cacao only grows in tropical climates, so that eliminates most American farmland from consideration. Even in the states where it's warm enough, it isn't wet enough. There's one exception to this rule in the States. That's Hawaii. But Hawaii is expensive, to the surprise of nobody who has ever looked at anything in Hawaii. There are other tropical areas that support cacao growth, but countries like Brazil have made it clear that these organizations aren't going to get away with basically stealing it from them. So, why not grow this stuff in a greenhouse? Too expensive. The jarring fact of the matter is that those big cargo ships can carry this stuff across the water for next to nothing. The cost of getting it for as cheap as you can somewhere else is not offset really at all by shipping it across the fucking Blue Pearl.
So you mean to tell me that we can't manufacture everything in the US?
But can you believe that?
Then how will all of these corporations bring productions back to the States to avoid tariffs?
I know. Yeah. So there's the answer to the question. It doesn't pencil anywhere else, or it doesn't pencil as well. But there's another answer to the question sitting in the middle of the question itself. Why not move the operation somewhere where they will know if child slavery happens? Because then they'll know whether or not child slavery is happening. And feigning ignorance to this reality has been core to the conduct of Nestle and all the other suspects here. Is it happening? No way to tell for certain. And that uncertainty, by the way, has been making companies like Nestle a fortune.
To be clear, we don't think Nestle secretly has a perfectly transparent supply chain. We think it's opaque as shit, but would allege the company is happy about this opacity. The less they know, the less they have to be made accountable for.
Yes. If people are saying it is happening, then it's obvious, according to Nestle, according to all the big guys, more research is needed.
And this is a common stalling tactic. When a corporation or trade group says, we hear you, and that they're investigating something on their own, they are doing so to delay the formation of a narrative and buy themselves time to A, continue profiting, and B, take control of the narrative themselves. It's your 14-year-old cousin saying, geez, we'll get to it. Stop nagging us about checking for child slavery in our supply chain. And then turn back to playing video games.
That's exactly right. So in 2001, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, the IITA, another ridiculous acronym, commissioned a study which was carried out in Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, and Nigeria. Now, there were some notable decisions made in how this study was carried out, and here they are. The study took the form of a survey of farmers in these regions and not in their labor pools. And here's a quote from one of the sources. It seemed more focused on maximizing productivity and assessing socioeconomic conditions than getting to the bottom of the presence of WFCL. It focused on the quantitative stuff. Are there kids working on your farm? How many of them are your kids? Rather than the more in-depth quality of work type qualitative questions. Lastly, the Save the Children Canada researchers quality checking this research found that many of the IITA interviewers were uncomfortable breaching the subject of child work in general. They weren't even asking the question. In the end, though public release of the data sets were promised, all the IITA wound up posting was their analysis of the survey data, which revealed there were 284,000 children working on cacao plantations in West Africa, with 200,000 working in Côte d'Ivoire. Most of those were working with their families on these farms. By 2004, this too was withdrawn, this analysis, apparently because its purpose had been served. Finally, the industry had a narrative to shoo away these allegations. Here it is quoted by a spokesperson for Nestle. Child labor was presented as slavery, but it was just the normal practice of families using children to run the family freeholding. This statement that a lot of these children are working family farms is correct, mind you. It is. Around 2/3 of the farms, mostly small, remember, in Côte d'Ivoire, rely on child labor, the labor of the farmer's children or of the sharecropper's children. But when this is the labor of the farmer's children or the children of a sharecropper, that doesn't mean it's okay to shrug it off. The person who raises this point is looking for an opportunity to do just that, shrug it off and enjoy their chocolate. Give me a break, they say as they eat their Kit Kat. And, don't give it to them and shit.
They're imagining American Midwestern dramatized farming, where
Yes.
a kid gets back from school, puts on his straw hat, and hops on a tractor and call his dad Pa. And we should also mention, farming is fucking hard. So even in the American Midwest, where that also wasn't great. But again, different subject, different episode.
Yeah, in every single movie about an American farmer's son, the American farmer winds up dying in an accident on the American farm.
They're all Dust Bowl tragedies.
Yes, every one of them is a story of heartache and struggle.
And somehow tornadoes. But anyway.
Yeah, there's always a tornado. These kids, by and large, are not going to school at all. The only thing they will know how to do professionally by the time they reach adulthood is farm cacao for starvation wages, which is why this practice is bad, and for kids under 14, illegal. Though this legal hurdle applies only to the big incorporated businesses and not to the local farms where children spray pesticides and sling machetes.
So is this slavery? Well, not technically. But It also isn't all that we're talking about.
No, it is not. What we're talking about is this, child labor, which we just discussed, which isn't good even when it's on the family farm. Slave labor and child slave labor. When we say child slave labor, we are talking about a person who is a kid hookup, taking payment from farmers in Côte d'Ivoire and traveling over to Burkina Faso and offering parents a portion of that received payment in exchange for the labor of their children, some of whom are as young as 12 for X number of years. These children are then taken to Côte d'Ivoire to work on these cacao farms indefinitely in many cases, despite the fact that their return is usually a promise made to the parents. Often these parents are also told their child will be going to school while working on these farms, which suggests a shot at a better life. They're shooting the moon, they hope. In reality, the children are either given to the farmer who paid for them, many of whom will keep them for as long as they want, or they are taken to a sort of halfway house and kept in a locked room for days. They're then marched through the woods and through back alleys to avoid border patrol and sold to whoever can afford them, on an auction block, like Charleston or something. Some of these children wind up as beggars or worse. Some wind up as servants of Europe, though this is rare, and many wind up on farms like the ones we're talking about right now and are subjected to stuff that would be familiar to anyone who has studied slavery in the American South.
Yeah, some, by the way, grow up to become adult slaves, which is also bad. We still need to care about them too.
Yeah, let's make this whole thing about slavery in general instead of just the cute little child slaves. Slavery is bad. In one of our main sources, a huge, heavily detailed article written by Claire Jordan, David Old, Rebecca Reynolds, and Lacey Lofton, it's in our sources, check out that little hot link thing or whatever you call it, an investigative journalist bought a source for their article off the auction block.
Yikes.
The source told an all-too-predictable story about things being bad in Côte d'Ivoire, but worse at home. You hear about people being enslaved, they said, but you see people return to your village safely with some modest earnings for their family. At the end of the day, just hope for the best. This all makes rounds, and finally, there's consensus. Okay, the big internationals say, your chocolate was made by slaves. Cue the next shift.
Chapter 3, a masterclass in addressing a humanitarian crisis to prevent a legislative crisis.
So in September of 2001, the Harkin-Engel Protocol was announced with 5 express goals. 1, support and complete research into child labor conditions in Côte d'Ivoire. Number 2, get all involved organizations on board with a plan to move forward by the end of the year. 3, get all involved parties to agree to a binding agreement by May of the following year. 4, 2 months after that, the chocolate industry establishes a foundation to carry out the agreed upon work. And last, by 2005, there would be an independent system in place to inspect cacao farms and find a way to certify that the chocolate you buy was not produced by enslaved workers. This sounds like a bold initiative. And Big Chocolate fought hard for it. But the reason they did that is because it gave them control, rather than ceding control to much more compelling legislation that would have required the FDA to label specific chocolate as being slave labor free. Because any claims of Big Chocolate being innocent hinged on them being unaware, this would be a problem and would effectively force them to stop buying the really, really cheap stuff. So they sprung into action. This bill passed the House and looked destined to make it through the Senate, so they had to act fast. Engel made clear that he would not shelve the legislation until there was a meaningful alternative. So the 10 involved multinationals, Nestle included, effectively agreed to whatever was needed to get Engels to budge. 2005? Sure, fine, we'll do it. Whatever it takes. But there was one key caveat. This alternative would be voluntary and non-binding. Therefore, of course, it was doomed. I have no idea how Engels gave up the line on that requirement. The 2005 deadline was passed and extended to 2008, which was also missed. But then in 2010, it was time for business. So these big multinationals proposed the Declaration of Joint Action to support implementation of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. This was the name of the alternative to the Engel Amendment, the Harkin-Engel Protocol. So basically 5 years after it was supposed to be done, they announced an initiative to start it.
They announced a concept of a plan to start.
Yes. Well said. That's exactly right. This compelling declaration sought to end 70% of child labor in Côte d'Ivoire by 2020. The year before, though, that's 2009, Nestle announced an initiative of its own, the Nestle Cocoa Plan.
Chapter 4, the Nestle Cocoa Plan.
So what's the Cocoa Plan? Is it any good? Well, the Cocoa Plan is a $110 million initiative, which is, mind you, not that much. It's not that much money for one company, for God's sakes, crafted to improve the lives of the farmers growing cocoa and improve the quality of the cocoa that Nestle buys.
Right off the bat, this seems unfocused.
Yeah.
We're going to stop slavery and make better chocolate? It feels like a mission statement designed to sell chocolate. I'm here to stop slavery and sell chocolate, and I'm all out of slavery.
Yeah, give me a break. All right? Regardless of their intentions, they had a goal, and to some degree, they put numbers to their desired progress in achieving that goal. To some degree. Nestle sought to source 100,000 tons of ethical cocoa by 2015, 120,000 tons by 2016, 150,000 tons by 2017, and by 2019, it was actually 183,000 tons that they reached. By 2015, Nestle had also trained community members to identify instances of WFCL in farms around them. They described this effort as a child labor monitoring and remediation system effort. And they did this in 22 of the co-ops they bought from in Côte d'Ivoire.
These are all pretty excellent figures. We should break off a Kit Kat to celebrate. There's just one problem. We have the top number of all these fractions. Now we need the denominator.
We need the bottom number. 100,000 tons sounds great. Out of how many tons, though,
are you
Nestle?
sourcing?
Yeah. What the fuck is actually going on here? All right, so those are big, impressive numbers. What are they coming out of here?
Let's see Paul Allen's numbers.
For starters, Nestle had 67 co-ops total, and we have no idea how many farms are in each co-op. A co-op is a bunch of farms working together and bringing crops to one place where a product is purchased from. So that's one crapshoot here. How big are the 22 co-ops? Where are the 22 co-ops? We have no fucking idea. These co-ops could be of 3 farms where other co-ops who aren't in this group of 22 have hundreds of farms bringing them a specific crop. Nestle sought to source 100,000 tons of ethical cocoa in 2015 and wound up surpassing that and sourcing 121,000 tons of cocoa. That is an unfathomable amount of what I imagine is just Nesquik sailing across the Atlantic. But how much cocoa is sailing around total? Well, in 2015, the total amount Nestle sourced was about 400,000 tons. And crucially, they didn't mention where all this ethical cocoa was coming from. Was it coming from Côte d'Ivoire exclusively? Probably not. It was probably coming from some of the places that were easy to track anyways. It seems like they stopped sharing how much of the cocoa was ethically sourced in 2020, saying instead, that the cocoa was sourced through the Nestle Cocoa Plan. Even by that metric, they were short of their goal of 230,000 tons by about 13%. In 2021, they touted that 51% of their cocoa was directly sourced and traceable, which seems like a step down, right? And more on that later. Point is, the highest concentration we see of ethically sourced cocoa from the total is in 2019, where 44% of the cocoa was sourced ethically. Not bad. Not bad. What in the hell is ethically sourced cocoa, even? What is that? Well, in theory, all the cocoa coming through the Nestle Cocoa Plan is ethically sourced, because Nestle chose to get this cocoa fair trade and UTZ certified.
You might be wincing at the word chose. Yes, Nestle chose these themselves, and Madeline Wood, the author of Brown-Watson Case 1506, winced too and began digging. And it turns out these two certifications were not chosen at random.
Yeah, and they're not like out of a list of like 5 certifications a big company can choose from. There are shitloads. It was a very deliberate choice. An UTZ certification is meaningful, no doubt about it, but it isn't a terribly strong choice for providing the consumer with supply chain transparency. UTZ certified parties are allowed access to the Good Inside portal, which allows them to see every step of their own supply chain. But crucially, the consumer is not granted access to this portal. It's for corporates only. So it's not transparent at all, really, but the certification speaks for itself, you see. It's a strong certification. They hold you to specific standards. Except Nestle is UTZ certified in only 12% of the countries in which they operate. So not so much. The UTZ certification was there, really, for PR only.
And if you caught the was in there, we'll get to that too.
Yeah. Speaking of PR purposes, Nestle was 100% fair trade in the UK for a while because the fair trade logo is huge there. And it was thought that would grow their customer base in the country, an extremely telling choice. What the fair trade certification means is that a more reasonable minimum price is being paid for the chocolate. Keep that in mind. Nestle can pay a more reasonable price, and for the UK they did it because awareness is higher in the UK, and it was seen as the only way forward in that country. The consumers do have power. Crucially, though, most of the products covered by the Nestle Cocoa Plan were fair trade or UTZ certified, but not both. Further, in 2020, Nestle abandoned the fair trade certification, and UTZ, that certification board or whatever you call it, and the Rainforest Alliance merged under the Rainforest Alliance banner. Nestle made this partnership the centerpiece of the Cocoa Plan thereafter, meaning eventually they just said, fuck it. The only way to fix this is to pay the farmers more, and we aren't going to do that, so fuck it.
Here's a good illustration of how much this big chocolate cared about this issue. From 2001 to 2019, an industry that claims to care desperately about this issue, slavery in their supply chain, spent $115 million to address this issue, while raking in $103 billion.
Per year.
So for those of you that would need to pull over the car to do that math, this means that the industry gave 0.00145% of 1 year's earnings over the course of almost 20 years.
Now here, we're saying Nestle phoned it in. But wait, we hear some of you saying, Nestle has remained a partner of the FLA to this day, and this is true. But Nestle's continued alliance with the Fair Labor Association, which is what FLA stands for, we would allege, is still just there for the PR, and came in handy here especially to help pad the public's perception of this shift. At first glance, you see, the FLA appears similar in significance to UTZ and fair trade, but hold your horses there. Partnering with the Fair Labor Alliance was a deliberate choice as well. You see, the Fair Labor Alliance is pretty agreeable relative to the Workers' Rights Consortium, and in the past, when helping companies address concern around Nike problems, They've agreed to accept funding for the research and certification from the groups they're investigating. While working to certify Nestle, the FLA agreed to base Nestle's certification on the practices demonstrated at the Nestle Cocoa Plan farms alone.
Jesus.
This is a stunning concession, but it wouldn't be the last. The FLA agreed to visit 4 of Nestle's best co-ops, quote, at random, and still found numerous violations. Typically, workers on the farms visited by the Alliance were completely unaware of Nestle's policies. The FLA found slave labor at one of the 4 farms and 25 children under the age of 15 working in dangerous conditions at another. And this was a site where child labor monitoring and remediation systems were there. This was one of the ones where they did it.
This is like the cream of the crop, no pun intended. Like of all of the co-ops, they were like, look at these 4, that'll make us look the best. And they're like, guys, this is a nightmare. I don't even want to go to the other farms.
Guys, there are slaves here.
You told us to look at this one. You paid us to look at this one.
What were your other choices? Despite Nestle's assertion that the presence of forced labor is absolutely prohibited, they wound up, quote, renegotiating with the farm where slavery was found. Remember, every rule is for sale. A telling metric dredged up by Tulane University found that between 2008 and 2014, the number of children working on farms that sell to Nestle grew by more than 250,000. It's an isolated little metric from a source written in 2015, peering out from an ocean of secrecy. Nonetheless, pretty telling.
Chapter 5, the Rainforest Alliance.
So, for the human rights stuff, Nestle looks to the FLA to some extent, but as consolation for Nestle's departure from fair trade nuts, their partnership with the Rainforest Alliance has become a centerpiece of this whole cocoa plan, as we mentioned earlier. Now, what is the Rainforest Alliance? Well, it's now the world's largest certifier of cocoa. What separates a Rainforest Alliance certification from fair trade? Well, the Rainforest Alliance has a better website. There's no denying that. And their logo is a little frog, so that's pretty cool. They stand out as the ones reimagining certification and trying to take it to a higher level. Consider this. For farmers working under fair trade, who provide only 5% of the world's cocoa supply, the following assurances are provided. A guaranteed minimum price.
Although there's evidence that a lot of the big players found workarounds.
Fixed premiums for community projects. An additional premium for organic farming. The goal of a living income for farmers.
A pathetic reminder that fair trade doesn't provide this either.
Yeah, it's just like trying to get close. Farmer control of premium funds. Farmer ownership of standards. And required input from farmer organizations. For the farmers working under the Rainforest Alliance, who supply 32% of the world's cocoa supply, none of these assurances are provided. And enforcement of the guidelines they do require are much weaker, which is better for the companies making the chocolate and leads to cheaper chocolate. Except, no, it doesn't. Child labor is a growing problem. Nestle admitted in 2019 that they themselves had found thousands of children working on their farms, and yet chocolate seems to have doubled in price. The workers aren't the only ones getting exploited, folks. Chocolate is terrible for you, and Nestle is taking you for as much as they can take you for. Nestle's been busted twice for working with Hershey and Mars to fix prices on chocolate, once in Canada and once here in the US, though that case is ongoing. A tip from me to you. If you see that a company is a member of the Rainforest Alliance, this unfortunately includes small cutesy brands like the one behind Seattle Chocolate and J. Coco, avoid them. Avoid the cute little frog.
Yeah, this is a insertion here. But, a lot of these initiatives are all about the farmer, right? Like, The farmer is the good guy. And I think that even in the beginning of this episode, it's easy for us to do that too. Like, the farmer should have more power than them. It's the farmer versus the corporation, which in many cases is true. But we also have to remember that farmers aren't these deified moral human beings necessarily. A lot of times, they are actual fucking slave owners. So, we have to remember that a lot of times, it is in the farmer's best interest to have slave labor because they also have a bottom line. So putting all of this onus or all of this control on farmers isn't necessarily reducing the odds of slave labor. A lot of times, or maybe sometimes, it is just pushing off on who the bad guy is. It's like, oh, well, we're giving farmers all the control. So if there's slave labor on these farms, well, that's their fault. They're the bad guys here. We're still benefiting from it, but it's not as if the farmer's interest and the organization's interest are always at odds. A lot of times, the farmer's bottom line and the conglomerate's bottom line both benefit from free labor. So let's not necessarily say, oh, the farmer is always this little guy in the wake of the corporate tsunami. A lot of times, the farmer's not necessarily a good guy either. And maybe they are, when we understand why, it can get really close to excusing bad behavior. But again, that's not necessarily a rabbit hole for this episode. But I just think that in these narratives, it's really easy to create good guys and bad guys. And a lot of times, it's just not that cut and dry. Chapter 6, Nestle's environmental commitments regarding cocoa and the damage they would need to repair.
So in 2017, perhaps aware of the impending failure of their efforts to mitigate child slavery, Nestle signed on to the CFI, or the Cocoa and Forest Initiative. Was this a cop-out? Yeah, allegedly. But it isn't one lacking logic. The deforestation seen in this area of the world is almost unbelievable.
It turns out that when you pay people next to nothing for a good that they grow, and it's all they can grow and all they know how to do, they seek to offset the pay disparity by just growing fucking more of that crop, even if it means doing so on other land.
Your neighbor's land? Sure. But also national parks. See, despite all of Nestle's promises on this front, deforestation in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire is not only not slowing, it is accelerating. This could be due in part to the fact that Nestle has focused its deforestation mitigation efforts on what it considers to be its 5 highest risk raw materials: meat, palm oil, pulp and paper, and sugar and soy. Coffee and cocoa? Not as grave a concern, which is funny because at least on the cocoa side, the deforestation again is picking up. The period between 2019 and 2020 in Ghana saw 150% more tree cover loss than was seen between 2011 and 2019. And that same period, the one between 2019 and 2020, was 370% higher than it was between 2001 and 2010. In Côte d'Ivoire, tree cover loss was 230% higher in that 2019 and 2020 time range than it was between 2001 and 2017, and 340% higher than the average loss during the 2000s. Mighty Earth, an NGO, released a bombshell report on this, illustrating that 90% or more of the landmass in protected areas and national parks in the two countries have been deforested and turned into cocoa. Elephants and chimpanzees are on their way to being pushed out of the region, and today less than 4% of the Ivory Coast remains densely forested. It's forecasted that by 2034, the two countries will be completely free of dense forest because of cocoa.
So let's review all of the things that Nestle and this terrible system have done. Just because I feel like it's easy to get lost in the sauce. Child labor and slavery. Yep, they got that one.
Yeah.
Price fixing. We kind of glossed over that because it's not as bad as the worst forms of child labor.
It's hard to lump those in on the same complaint, isn't it? Hey, children are dying. And also, my candy bars are more expensive.
Which, like, just because one is worse doesn't mean that they're both not bad. You know?
Yeah, they're both bad, for sure.
Deforestation is horrible. That's not good.
Near complete, mind you.
Some of those numbers, you kind of gloss over them because we're saying so many of them. But like less than 4% remains will be out of dense forest by 2034. Dude, 2034 is not very far away.
That's 9 years.
Yeah.
That's not long at all.
Yeah.
And there will be no trees left.
That's not fucking good. Ethical source cocoa is mostly bullshit.
Nothing works. I mean, the big problem is, and maybe we glossed over this too, or maybe we're about to cover it, and if we are, then we can edit this part out. Anytime you hear an issue described as complex, it is because someone profits from the way it is now.
Yes.
And the big complicated part of this issue is that the way to solve all of this is to pay farmers a living wage.
And if they're going to be work on the farms.
Right, yeah. And that's, in theory, like, at that point, you can start... Because the problem is, most of the farmers are using... Or a shitload of farmers in Côte d'Ivoire are using child labor because they can't afford to use other labor. The slave labor thing reaches this gray area that's... It's hard to even talk about. Again, I from a pragmatic standpoint,
I think that we have to be careful, letting these farmers off scot-free. I mean, the same argument could be made, farmers in the 19th century American South were only using slaves because they couldn't afford to pay anybody.
It's like the first line of defense. They're still slavers.
Yeah, they are still slave owners. That is bad. And I think that, yes, paying farmers or paying the people who work on the farms a living wage solves a lot of this problem. And yes, paying farmers or the owners of those small businesses more for their product is good, but I think that we also need some sort of check and balance to ensure that the farmers aren't just taking an extra cut for themselves and continuing to use child labor.
Yeah.
Because they'll fucking do that.
Yeah, that's bad and shit.
Yeah. Complexity is often used as a obstruction for change, for sure.
Desperation is also often used as an excuse for atrocities.
Well said. Well said.
Yep.
It is fairly complex, but that doesn't mean that the solution is complex.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's excusable to any degree.
For sure. We say all that to say, in our sources, we've included a list of chocolate companies that, as far as we can tell, don't use slavery to make chocolate. However, if this episode has made me wary of anything, it is fucking fair trade certified bullshit.
Right, dude. God damn it.
Nothing works.
I was looking at that cutie little, Seattle chocolate company was one I was going to put on there, and then I was panning down, and it's yes, we're very proud of our work with the Rainforest Alliance.
God damn it!
Damn it!
I just want to not feel bad about eating chocolate.
I want it's still delicious, for God's sakes. If there's a workaround here where there isn't child slavery and where everyone has a roof over their head and lights and water and all that stuff, then I think there's a really happy symbiosis to be had here. If you made it this far, thank you for listening, and sorry for the downer.
Yep.
Nestle and the other big chocolate groups need to be destroyed. Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire enacted a $400 per ton premium limited income differential, or LID, meaning a premium on cocoa per pound that goes just to the farmers. And though Nestle and others would never outright refuse the lid because it would be a PR disaster, they have been working their asses off to find ways to avoid paying it. If these countries can find a way to stick it to them via legislation, we at Profiteers vs. the People say hurry. In the next one, we're talking about coffee, and oh my god. Anyways, thanks so much for listening. It means an awful lot. Apparently, if you like, comment, and subscribe, it really makes a whole different. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. It means an awful lot, apparently, if you like, comment, and subscribe. So if you think we earned it, be a pal. And if you want to comment just like, hey, that was a pretty okay episode, guys. If you want to, consider making a little bit more, and maybe I'll listen to it if it's this good or even a little bit better. Even that, I suppose, would suffice.
Yep, check out our subreddit. Email us if you have a request or a comment. We love you all, and
Goodbye.